I'm Laura, this is my colleague Charlotte. I'm going to just do a quick introduction of who we are and basically what we do, and then we'll watch a very short one. We've got two campaign videos to show you, one at the beginning, and then I'll speak a bit about that and a bit about the situation we're in at the moment. And then we're going to watch another video. They're both short, and then Charlotte's going to speak a bit about that, and then we can take some questions. We are the English Collective of Prostitutes, a network of sex workers working on the streets and indoors, and we are campaigning for decriminalisation and safety. We fight against being treated like criminals, and we do a lot of work helping sex workers win against charges of loitering and soliciting, brothel keeping, and controlling. And the brothel keeping and controlling are the two most often used against sex workers who are working together for safety. Most sex workers are mothers trying to do the best for their children, and so we are also campaigning against austerity cuts and for housing and other survival resources, so that any of us can leave prostitution if and when we want to. We have a national network throughout the UK, and we also have an international network, including sister organisations in Thailand, an organisation called Empower, and in the US, in San Francisco, the US Prostitutes Collective. And we, those of us based in London, we're based at the Crossroads Women's Centre in Kentish Town, with lots of other women's groups, which is a big power for us, some of whom who spoke earlier in some of the other sessions. So if we could just show the first video, please. Thank you.
No, you can't have sweets for dinner.
No, you can't have sweets.
Because your teeth will fall out, that's why.
Because your teeth will fall out.
Talk about it later.
Talk about it later.
I really got to go. I love you too.
I really got to go.
Bye.
I love you too.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, love.
Have you heard anything from that client?
No, nothing.
No?
No.
How are you getting on with your night class?
Really enjoying it. Yeah, it's really good.
Good.
It's quite funny, actually, because when Ella comes home from school, she tells me about her day and then I tell her about mine.
Sweet.
What about you? How's your mum?
She's much better this week. My sister's with her and she's making a fuss of her.
Is she?
She loves that.
Does she?
Yes.
Yeah. Are we expecting anyone, Simone?
Because your teeth will fall out, that's why. Talk about it later. I love you too.
Thank you very much. So that was our campaign film for our Make All Women Safe campaign, which shows the basic injustice of the prostitution laws. That is, despite the fact that the selling and buying of sex is completely legal, there's a law that puts sex workers' safety at risk every day. And even though, so the job is legal, but the law makes it illegal for women to work together, which means that you have to make a choice to either keep yourself safe and face the possibility of arrest, or avoid a criminal record and put yourself in increased danger. And we don't think that anyone should have to make that choice. So we are asking for support to get rid of these unnecessary and dangerous laws by supporting our campaign for decriminalisation, so that sex workers have the same protection the law offers to other people. We launched the film last year on the 1st of March to mark International Sex Worker Rights Day, and the campaign did go to a government petition, but now goes to our own petition on our website. And it basically, the campaign was designed to basically bypass all the arguments about whether sex work is right or wrong or moral or immoral, and basically to say whatever your personal opinions are on sex work, there is one thing that we should all agree on, and that is that sex workers deserve the same rights to safety. We also developed some question and answers as part of the campaign, which you can see at makeawwomensafe.org. I just wanted to speak a bit about the situation that we're currently in with the coronavirus crisis, which has obviously had a big impact on sex workers and thrown millions of people in general into crisis. But for sex workers forced by criminalisation, stigma and discrimination to live in the shadows, that crisis is even more hidden. And obviously the nature of the job involves personal contact, and that's obviously exactly what people are being warned against. The virus comes on top of an already crisis of poverty, especially among women. And as I said, most sex workers are mothers who have been made poorer by austerity cuts. I'm sorry, I have to turn my light on. Hold on a sec. And 1.5 million people have been made deliberately destitute by government policies, and 4 million children are living in poverty, which means that hundreds of thousands of families in the UK rely on the income from sex work to survive. During this crisis, sex workers' income is down, and for some women, it's completely disappeared. Some sex workers have turned to non-contact forms of sex work, like camming, where possible. Women working on the street, migrant and trans workers, who already have the highest rates of poverty, arrest and violence, are particularly suffering. Like other workers, we're being forced to choose between earning an income and risking our lives and our loved ones' health. And contact with the health professionals and tracing measures are obviously hindered by criminalisation, because sex workers can't say what you're doing or who you know for fear of arrest and discrimination. We have been demanding from the very beginning of the crisis emergency money, because sex workers are denied status as workers and are therefore denied the rights and entitlements other workers may have, although obviously in limited. Limited help has been given in general. Many of us and the families who depend on the income will face destitution if we can't access whatever emergency money workers win from the government. Our sister organisation Empower in Thailand says, in life and in emergencies, sex workers like other women are doing the work of caring for others, yet this work is not recognised, compensated or supported. For example, even though sex workers create 4 to 10% of GDP, sex workers are criminalised and left out of labour protection and social security. So from the beginning of the pandemic, since the beginning of the year, we have been demanding decriminalisation still an immediate moratorium on raids, arrests and prosecutions, and the implementation of the 2016 Parliamentary Home Affairs Committee recommendation that sex workers on the street and in premises be decriminalised. We've also been demanding immediate and easy to access financial support for sex workers in crisis and workers' status, so that sex workers can get sick pay, wage relief, and whatever benefits that we need. We also support the demand for a care income, of which there was a workshop earlier by the statement by the Global Women's Strike. Because if we were paid for our caring work, we could leave prostitution if we wanted to. We also are supporting the demands for people, the release of people in immigration detention centre, and an end to sharing of information between immigration and health services, so that people can access healthcare without fear of deportation. I'm going to say a bit more at the end about the victories that we've had and what you can do to help, but I'm going to hand over to Charlotte. Thank you very much.
So hi everybody, my name is Charlotte, volunteer with the ECP. So before I go any further, could we just play the second video about migrant sex workers fighting against police illegality?
I am from Brazil. I live here in this country. I work here. Sex work is legal, but working together is not. I was working under my friend's roof. It's safer to be together. They arrested me. My safety is legal. And they took me away to a center in Bedford. I don't know where Bedford is, but I am here. I am not working now. I'm detained as an immigrant.
In 2011, I was attacked and had to live on the streets. In 2012, I got a job at a flat. The police raided it, asked me questions for 4 hours. I was in my underwear. Eventually they gave me a letter. It says I must leave the country. I must leave now.
I was not born in the UK. I work here to support my child and 3 other family people back home. They depend on me. How can I work if the law restricts the work? Sex work is legal, yet I'm seen as a criminal. They send me back home, and home is not safe.
A man threatened me whilst working. The police who drove by did not help. The man attacked me. The police told me to go home. I knew this man's name, Facebook, had photos, his license plate. The police did not help. I was called back home, so I went. I stayed.
I was working on the street. They took me away, kept me overnight. I understood nothing. I am Romanian. They didn't care.
I was given a warning, another one, and I'll be deported. So I got a letter from the ECP which states why I can stay. I show the letter every time they stop me.
Okay, so as you can see, as well as things that Laura has already mentioned, there's kind of another layer of troubles that comes with being a migrant sex worker, especially in the UK. So migrant sex workers are actually disproportionately targeted when many of them are just mothers that come to the UK to make a living for their families and children for a better life. And this has been made even worse, of course, with Brexit, given that it fosters an increasingly toxic and hostile immigration environment, which gives the police a lot of incentive to, further target these migrant women. And migrant women are especially vulnerable. And I think a lot of the times the authorities know this and use this wrongfully in their advantage in terms of charging these women with offenses, etc. So we actually handled a case earlier this year with two Brazilian women, and they were actually working indoors, and they were raided and charged with brothel keeping and controlling each other when they were actually just working together indoors for safety. And as the case moved on, we saw that their charges were then reduced to only having a caution on their record. But this came with the condition of the fact that they had to write over any money seized on their arrests, which was over thousands of pounds, and cautions remain on your record for really, really long periods of time. And the thing is, with these two women, one of them had a more stable immigration status than the other, and that actually influenced their decisions to plead guilty or not. So the lady that had more stable immigration status actually decided to keep fighting and plead not guilty for all the charges. So the ECB actually intervened in this situation, and we got our resources and lawyers down and rallied the community through a public appeal, and all charges against these two women were withdrawn once the hearing began. But this shows that this was the Crown prosecution actually trying their hand at getting charges on these women's records and taking advantage of their vulnerable positions, both as migrants and as sex workers and as women, to get them to accede to whatever that was against them. And of course, as you've seen in the video just now, we also had dozens of cases of migrant sex workers being mistreated, dragged down the streets in their underwear, questioned in their underwear for hours, and this was especially apparent in the Soho raids a few years ago. There's also been a trend in which the police raid premises, saying on the basis that it's for anti-trafficking operations. But there has also been countless instances in which this doesn't actually result in anybody getting charged with trafficking offenses or anybody getting, rescued as trafficking victims. More often than not, we see that they go on these so-called anti-trafficking operations, but in the end, we see that people, the outcome is that people are getting charged for immigration offenses as a result of these raids. So here we really ask the question, do these anti-trafficking operations truly intend to help victims, or is it just a way to justify raids and deportation of migrant sex workers? And so the video you just watched just now, we actually launched in the wake of the massive Black Lives Movement protests. And actually that gave us and many women on our network massive strength and enabled us to talk and speak about the issues of police abuse, and for people to understand clearly the situation of police illegality and abuse, not only in America, but all across the world, especially in the UK. And what the young movement gives immense strength because it was a movement, encompassing and pro-sex work. So lastly, I would just like to some sources that the ECP has on our website. If you yourself are a migrant sex worker, or anybody you know is a migrant sex worker, we have, or if you just want more information about what we do, on our website, we have a pamphlet called Sex Workers Are Being Screwed by Brexit, which details the ways in which Brexit actually impacts sex workers, as well as a rights sheet for sex workers' rights against deportation. So it's kind of like an all-encompassing kind of FAQ on where sex workers stand when it comes to the laws at the moment. So yeah, nothing else from me. Laura, would you like to just give some closing statements?
Thank you very much. Okay, I just wanted to go through briefly what people can do, and then we can go to some questions, and we can also maybe discuss that at the end as well. At this point, you can sign the petition, you can watch and share the migrant video. You can follow us on social media for action alerts. So, for example, we just a couple of weeks ago sent out an action alert asking people to ring a letting agent urgently who were trying to evict 2 women who were working from flats in central London, and the landlord was literally outside the flat and got in the front door and bashed down the front door, cut the CCTV cables in the flat. And so we sent out a call asking people to help and stop the eviction, and we got some really fantastic help from the London Renters Union to stop the eviction, like literally stop it, because the landlord was right there trying to get into the building. And so that was a really effective action. That the case is still ongoing, and that it happened because the landlord said, after they'd agreed a COVID rate of rent, and then he said, oh, now it's going up to full rate, and if you don't pay the full rate, then we're going to throw you out at the end of the week. And then that's when they turned up and bashed down the door. But they're still there, so we stopped the eviction. So that was a great victory there. And lots of information like that, and action alerts like that. If you follow us, our books and some other information are also on the Global Women's Strike stall on the Anarchist Book Fair website, so you can see more information there. So should we answer some questions?
Yeah, Laura, do you have any on your end? I have a few on my end.
Do you want to read them out and then we can both answer them? Is that okay?
Sure. So first would be, do you represent men? So most people in our network, so the ECP is basically kind of like a community actions grassroots place in which most people in our network are actually women, but we have encountered some cases in the past in which we do work with men. In my memory, not sex working men specifically, but it could be people such as partners or landlords. Am I right, Laura?
Do you mean representing? Yeah, people who've been arrested, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we have most of who were representing, most sex workers are women and cis and trans women, and we, our organisation mostly represents women sex workers, but we have represented male sex workers definitely, and there are male sex workers in our core and in our group, and we have also, where sex workers have asked us to work to stop the prosecution of men who are allowing women to use their premises, which we have only done when the sex workers have said they wanted us to do that. There's another question which says, are there similar organisations in Northern Ireland? I understand that most brothels are run by gangs. Wouldn't a change in the law legitimise gangs? Wouldn't trafficking increase? And do you provide sexual health support? Do you want to answer any of those, Charlotte?
Yeah, I'll do the okay, so we are I'll do the last one first. So the ECP is mainly a campaigning organization. So we have a lot of kind of affiliated organizations that do provide sexual health supports, and we call those sex workers' rights projects. So and there are actually many of them available around London and in the UK. So we work closely with them, and we do keep in contact with many of them in case we need to refer anyone to them. But personally, we are more of a kind of campaigning centered organization than a sexual health support one.
Also, to add to that, the sexual health support, they're mainly sort of NHS projects who they are not sex workers who are running the projects, unlike the ECP and the sex worker organisations that exist. They are run by NHS staff, so it's a completely different outlook from that as a result of that. And some of them are much better than the others, but many of the projects around the UK that hand out condoms and cups of teas and go around trying to giving tea and condoms to women, particularly on the street, are sometimes religious organisations, sometimes have a position that actually sex work should be criminalised and actually decriminalisation should increase. And so they have a completely different perspective to us. In terms of Northern Ireland, sorry, go ahead.
Just to add to that, I think there are many of these organizations, and they all have their own kind of like backings and agendas, but a lot of the sexual health support organizations, they also, how do you say that, they sometimes may also have the goal of trying to like save women out of prostitution, and in terms of a very like kind of basic framework of give you a cup of tea, give you some condoms, and try to like talk you out of doing this line of work without actually considering the larger kind of problems of poverty and the circumstances that led women there. So I would say I would also cast some doubt on like the efficacy of what they do sometimes as well. So, and I think that's what makes ECP different, in the sense that we really focus on self-organizing. So we are organizing, and everything that we do is in our self-interest.
And in terms of other similar organisations in Northern Ireland, there isn't a specific organisation for Northern Ireland. There are organisations in Scotland, and there is the Sex Workers Alliance of Ireland, who work in the Republic, but there isn't a specific organisation for the north of Ireland. And in terms of understanding, sorry, I have to turn this light on. Most brothels are run by gangs. Wouldn't a change in the law legitimise gangs, and wouldn't trafficking increase? Well, first of all, most brothels are not run by gangs. Most brothels are just setups. Some women working together. Sometimes there's somebody running the place who is organising the rota, organising the clients, and paying the rent and that kind of thing. Sometimes the women are just working together for safety. Sometimes the women are there at the same time. Sometimes they're there on different days. It works in all different ways. And a change in the law decriminalising sex workers wouldn't legitimise or decriminalise violence, including trafficking. Those would still be against the law. So force, coercion, kidnap would still be against the law, and in fact it would actually improve exploitation, because if you're no longer a criminal, you have much more power and entitlement to insist on your rights and to say, actually, what's happening here, you have much more power to take your bosses to court, or to say, sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback, so it's a bit distracting. Do you have anything to add to that, Charlotte?
Yeah, so I think this question comes from kind of like the archetype of like the pimp and the brothel. And I would say that as Laura has mentioned, a lot of brothels are not run by gangs or pimps, but in those that are, the function of the pimp being there is mainly for protection and of the woman, because the pimp is there to kind of like protect the woman from violence and, like, for example, the police and stuff like that. So actually a change in the law to decriminalize sex work will actually further incentivize women to actually self-organize and work together safely in these brothels without having the need for a pimp or anybody else there for their protection. Because in the case of decriminalization, as it is in New Zealand currently, that brothels with us just function as any other kind of like private business, like for example, hairdressers, in which if they experience violence, there wouldn't need to be any kind of like additional layer of protection for themselves because they're already protected by the law as a worker.
Okay, thank you very much. Shall we go to the next question, which is, would sex work exist in an anarchist society? Do you want to go? Do you want to go? Or shall I go first?
I don't know. I mean, I guess sometimes we get these what if questions a lot, and I guess we can spend all day trying to imagine radical futures for ourselves and others. But I think as of now, as an organization, we are very preoccupied with the very stark and depressing realities of what the women in our network face. So would sex work exist in an anarchist society? I don't really know. And that's my answer. Laura?
I think if you mean would sex work exist in a fair and equal society, our very first document that was produced, we've been going since 1975, which I'm sorry, I don't think I said at the beginning, but the first document was called For Prostitutes Against Prostitution, and outlined our political perspective on what we're doing and why we're doing it. And we as an organization do not glamorize prostitution or say that it's a fantastic job or say that everyone should go and do it, or you know, the women in our group are just that is just not representative of who the women in our group are and why they are doing it. And as we said, you know, most sex workers in our group are mothers who are just working to support families. And so in a fair and just society, no one would have to you know, work. Sorry, hold on. You know, you wouldn't have to do any work that you didn't want to, not only sex work, but you know, work would be completely different, and you know, wages would be completely different, everything would be completely different. And so and yeah, in a fair and just society, you wouldn't have to exchange anything, including sex, if you didn't want to or need to. So I guess no, it wouldn't exist, but we'll work on that. And then somebody said, could you share links? I don't know if there's anybody in our group who's on the chat that can share some links of some of the things that we're talking about. You can find out a lot of our resources on our website, prostitutescollective.net, or the Make a Women Safe video, which is at makeawomenssafe.org. And we're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And then somebody says, me and my GF cam, and she does work. I don't just cams. Are we a brothel? Where can I find more on the law? I don't fully understand that question, but if you mean there are two people camming in the same place, I think that's what you mean. Is it a brothel? where can you find out more about the law? We have looked into this before because we have been asked this a number of times, and the answer is it's never been, I mean, we've never heard of the police targeting people for camming two people from the same premises. We have never heard of that, although the law is a bit shady, because of course the law says for a brothel there has to be 2 or more sex workers selling sex from the premises, and so they might technically one day say, well, camming counts as that, and therefore if there's 2 of you, but we haven't heard of there being any raids or arrests along those lines so far. We haven't heard of that happening. And thank you. Somebody's put, how do I support you? What is your site? And that's prostitutescollective.net. Thank you very much for all your questions so far. Can I just say a bit more about the victories that we have had this year? So just to say a couple of more things, I told you about the case in central London. We also over the summer stopped a woman being outed in the local press. She's a school teacher who also was working on the side, who had children at the school where she works, and somebody anonymously sent an email to the local press and also the national papers saying that she was doing it and outing her, and the local paper wanted to run it, and we did a big campaign to stop the press from printing, because she had children at her school. It would have been an absolute disaster, and we made the case, the safety case of this kind of thing can lead to vigilante attacks and violence against the women and children, and how can you be considering this? And also was making the point of, she's a teacher, she's been working throughout the pandemic, and we're all supposed to be clapping for the carers, and then you go and do this to a key worker. How can you do this? And in the end they didn't publish, so that was a big victory, and we were really delighted. And there's also been an increase because some people have moved online in stalking cases, and we had a victory again where a woman was being stalked being harassed a lot of phone calls, a lot of text. The person was also contacting members of her family and various other things, and she we got her a lawyer who wrote a letter to the man. We had their contact details, and they said, sorry, I'm distracted by the fact that my light's turning off, saying that she knew his name and looked him up on LinkedIn, and so has some contact details for him, and the lawyer sent him a letter threatening him with action if he didn't stop, and he did stop. So that was again a big victory. And then also a couple of victories for women who were working on the street, which is that earlier this year there was in Hull, there was in a particular area, there was some orders introduced which banned sex workers completely from a particular area, and they have now been withdrawn, which was fantastic, after a High Court decision which related to something completely different, actually animal rights protesters, which had the same orders imposed on them. The animal rights activists successfully appealed on the basis that the orders didn't actually name the people, and it was the same orders. So the orders in Hull against the sex workers didn't actually name them, and the High Court ordered that that wasn't right, and that therefore they should be gotten rid of. So that was really fantastic and a big victory for the women in Hull who were fighting their own case as well against the civil orders. And there's also for people who have loitering and soliciting charges on their criminal records, there's actually a statutory instrument on disclosures of convictions in Parliament right now, which when it's passed will mean that you don't have to disclose convictions for loitering and soliciting to employers, but you have to wait 11 years after you get the convictions. We're campaigning for convictions to be expunged completely, but this will help a lot of women in our network who have convictions from 11 years ago. So we can send more information out about that soon when we know when that's actually been passed. So that's also a big victory. Okay, thank you. We have some questions. Do you want to read the questions out? Okay, we have 10 minutes left. We'll do these last questions.
Okay, so first question would be, what are the biggest barriers to sex work being recognized as real work and women being allowed to work together?
Should we do them all together? Do you want to read them all out?
Okay, yeah, the second one would be, have general attitudes in England improved or got worse? Are there any current politicians that are supportive or receptive? I guess that's needed for a lot of change. Next one would be, I'm wondering about COVID-19 and the impact of the pandemic on sex workers in terms of health, safety, well-being, wages, benefits. And did ECP get a response from the government for the demand for emergency payments for sex workers?
Okay, thank you. They're really great questions. Do you want to answer any of them, Charlotte, or shall I?
How about you go first, Laura?
Okay, so the biggest barriers to sex work. So basically, there is so in terms of the general situation, there is some support from some current politicians, some from the Labour Party, some sort of individual members of Parliament. The Green Party and the Liberal Democrats actually have policy for decriminalisation, and there are also some odd MPs in the Conservative Party who support for their own sake, and so the politicians that are supportive from the Labour side are receptive. They are up against a big sort of section of the Labour Party, mostly sort of women politicians who call themselves feminists, who are anti-prostitution and want to keep criminalisation and actually increase criminalisation. They say they want to criminalise clients in the name of gender equality, but actually they don't actually want to remove the laws that are already existing against sex workers. They want to add these extra laws which criminalise the men for buying sex. And what they ignore is that where in the countries where that's been introduced, of which there are now a few across Europe, that actually increases the dangers for sex workers, the same as sex workers being criminalised. And so we are against any measures to criminalise clients. And it's the same, the biggest barriers to sex work being recognised as real work and women being allowed to work together. It's the same, it's unfortunately our biggest sort of opposition to decriminalisation are women MPs, women's organisations, feminist organisations, on the grounds that all sex work, yeah, exactly, and as violence against women, and therefore should be criminalised. And it doesn't really matter that they don't offer also. You know, we're also saying, why don't, if you're serious about decreasing prostitution, then you have to deal with sex workers and women's poverty. and the reasons why you're in sex work in the first place. And funnily enough, those women who are saying that they're concerned about decreasing the levels of prostitution actually are not interested in doing anything about resources for women or women's poverty. They're just interested in increasing criminalisation. So there's a big battle, and we're actually always in a situation here where there might be legislation to criminalise clients, and in fact there is a consultation in Scotland now where the government is actually trying to propose the criminalisation of clients. So the groups in Scotland are doing a lot of work around that. So if you're interested in helping or doing something, then you can look out on how you can oppose the possible law changes there. Do you have anything to add, Charlotte?
I would say especially when these issues get raised in Parliament or in the lawmakers, that there's always this barrage of opposition that comes from those supposedly feminist women, and thus like we always have to contend that. And that I think the important point to note is that I think the ECP is one of the few organizations that are actually self-organizing, and that we know what is the situation at hand and what would actually benefit women that are on the streets, for instance. Whereas I think a lot of people that, you know, pro-criminalizing clients and stuff like that often come from ideological or kind of like moral grounds versus what will actually, versus, you know, empirical evidence and what has actually worked.
Yes, thank you. And then just briefly for the last couple of questions for the last few minutes, when I'm wondering about COVID-19 and the impact of the pandemic on sex workers in terms of health, safety, well-being, wages, benefits, etc. And did ECP get a response from the government for the demand for the emergency payments for sex workers? Do you want to start, Charlotte?
I mean, the first thing about COVID-19 and the impact on sex workers, firstly, I think a lot of sex workers are moving online, as a lot of people know, with the expansion of stuff like OnlyFans and stuff like that. But of course, that comes with its own barrage of other issues. So for example, revenge porn, data privacy and stuff like that. So a lot of people are having to kind of navigate a whole new realm of sex work, I guess. But on the other hand, there are also probably the most desolate women who are still working on the streets, and that's a continuous like kind of risk assessment between whether they should continue working versus, you know, their own health and their family's health. And this is especially, you know, precarious now, and that the people that are not able to move online are perhaps the most disenfranchised of the people not at work.
Thank you. And then we did get a response from the government for the demand for emergency payments, which is that they gave us all their figures about how much money they'd given out to nationally to various charity, domestic violence charities mostly, and we're just in the process of actually looking into the money that they've given out to see, because we know that actually none of it's been actually given to sex workers or even sex worker projects, but we're just going through and checking what they've said. But some of the money, where they have given money to so-called sex work projects, we found there's one in, they've given some money as one of the funds that they'd listed of the money that they've given out went to a project in Merseyside, which is a project run by the police. And one of the things that they do is that they get funded for is to explain to women why they're being arrested. So that's not exactly a project that we support or think is a good idea, and is certainly not giving out emergency payments to sex workers in desperate need. So we are just looking into their responses and the funds that they've listed. So we have to wrap up. So thank you so much for having us. And yeah, get in touch via our website, prostitutescollective.net. And yeah, we'll see you soon. Thanks so much.